Sorry guys, I went so carried away in the last video that I went about 35 minutes for just a one page section. So obviously I'll try to hurry up, but I'll still try to touch on every single point so that it's a almost a line by line analysis. And bear with me please, because this is the longest section of the paper. So as we know that a research paper consists first of an abstract, then there is the introduction, literature review, methodology, findings. But here this paper specifically, it doesn't have a literature review section and even a methodology section, because in the introduction itself these things are covered. For example, I didn't mention this in the last video, but these things, like we are doing three things. Let me find it. Yeah, we will first, these remarks will be in three parts. So Sridhar, they are saying that what they will do in this paper. So their methodology is tripartite. They have three things to discuss, and these were the things that they said. So the first thing that they will discuss is the impact of world Englishes on SLA. So they already touched on this in the introduction part, that and also as we read in the abstract part. Of course it was the summary, so that was touched on, and in the introduction part it was also touched in that it was also touched on that these fields of other linguistics branches, they are also very much related to world Englishes. And now we get a more in-depth discussion of this, and this section has a lot of subsections, 5 I think in particular, 6. There are 6 subsections of the second part of the paper, which is the impact of world Englishes on SLA. So let's get started. As Bolton, Ortega, Larson, Freeman and others have noted, so these are researchers of world Englishes and also other linguistics branches, have noted the paradigm gap paper of their own paper, Sridhar and Sridhar's own paper 32 years ago, and the TESOL quarterly paper. So TESOL quarterly is also a very famous linguistics and ELT journal, teaching especially for TESOL, teaching English to speakers of other languages. Paper Sridhar 1994. So two papers were discussed by many other researchers. The writers of this paper themselves, Sridhar and Sridhar, so they are talking about their own papers and how those were responded to by other researchers. For example, the 32 years ago paper, that paper was discussed, and the TESOL quarterly paper Sridhar 1994, which was written 8 years afterwards, were sharply critical of mainstream SLA. So they acknowledged, the other writers acknowledged that they were the papers that Sridhar and Sridhar 1994 wrote were very much critical, and they related to mainstream SLA. We were by no means the only ones. However, even that being said, that Sridhar and Sridhar raised many points, but they were by no means. This means that in no way were they the only ones. Like there were many others before Sridhar and Sridhar who brought up these parts, but Sridhar and Sridhar were also part of that. We were by no means the only ones. And then there are examples, Braj Kachru, and we will talk more about this in a later section where they will discuss Kachru's 3 circles. So Braj Kachru also talked about it. Yamuna Kachru, so she must be related to Braj Kachru, I'm not sure about the exact relationship. Firth and Wagner 1997 also noted SLA's shortcomings. So the shortcomings, for example, like the native speaker fallacy, like the native speaker is the best type of English speaker. So those types of shortcomings of SLA, they were also commented on by these 3 people, 4 people actually, 4 people besides Sridhar and Sridhar. So as example, so there must have been more. Significantly, a number of mainstream SLA researchers, including Da Costa, Larson, Freeman, Ortega, Kanga, Raja, Lee and Kubota, this issue, which means that Kubota was writing the paper that Sridhar and Sridhar are talking about are of this issue in particular, like this World English is 2018, the journals, this issue, the current issue. So even in the current issue, these things are talked about. Alright. have also noted the limitations of the earlier SLA models and come to incorporate perspectives that are convergent with. Okay, so convergent again, that come together. So, if not directly inspired by world Englishes. So they also acknowledge this. Besides the studies in the current issue, our critique has been discussed in detail in numerous studies, including Cook, Mistry and Bhatt, Mukherjee and Hunt, and May, to name a few. So their paper of 32 years ago, and also another paper, Sridhar's paper, 1994's paper, those were discussed in by the scholars, by other scholars as well. Our papers also happen to anticipate several developments in sociolinguistics, psycholinguistics, and multilingualism since, including interactive models of bilingual processing in psycholinguistics and neurolinguistics, and sociolinguistic models involving hybridity and dynamic interaction. It's such a big sentence, let's break it down. Our papers also happen to anticipate. Okay, so our papers means Sridhar and Sridhar's papers. So in the articles that they wrote, especially the article 32 years ago, so they could anticipate means that they could predict several developments in sociolinguistics. So sociolinguistics, as discussed, is another field of linguistics. Psycholinguistics is related to the brain and language acquisition, and multilingualism is about the field of study about people knowing more than two languages. It can even be two language, can be called multilingual, but normally we call them bilingual, and more than two we call them multilingual. Including interactive models of bilingual processing in psycholinguistics. So I will not get deep into this part here because this is technical. How do human brains think? Do they have how do their brains think? Does the brain have a separate storage for each language that we know? Like I know Bangla and I know English. Does my brain have two separate processing areas in there in the brain, or is it just one? So I'll not get deep into that here. So processing in psycholinguistics and neurolinguistics, which is similar to psycholinguistics but more specifically related to the brain, the neurons. And sociolinguistic models involving hybridity and dynamic interaction. So hybridity means that mixing of many theories, and dynamic interaction means not stable, so not static. So whenever we come upon the term dynamic, we should think about the term static and contrast it. So static means that it's stationary, it doesn't move, whereas dynamic means it's ever changing, such as translanguaging. So translanguaging is a term, like we language, it means that we use the language. So instead of saying that he and I are talking or using language, we can say he and I are languaging. And translanguaging refers to when people talk in more than one language. They use multiple languages together, like code switching, code mixing. I'm mixing Bangla. If I mix Bangla and English together, or if other people mix more languages, they bring in Hindi, Urdu in one of their sentences. So that's called translanguaging. According to May, our critical commentary is notable and worth revisiting for. So I think our refers to Sridhar and Sridhar. So that is very relevant because it's prescience. So it's prescience, not pre-science. So prescience means it's visionary, like a visionary skill, or its ability to predict the future. Like it was very looking into the future type of thing. So it's prescience and directness at that time. So it was also very direct. The commentary, the things that Sridhar and Sridhar said 32 years ago. We will discuss the convergence of SLA and World Englishes under the following rubrics. So again, it's like a thesis statement. Like Sridhar and Sridhar are saying that what they will discuss in this second part of the research paper, the impact of World Englishes on SLA. So first, what they will do is that they will acknowledgement of the pluricentricity of English. As I said, pluricentricity means that English doesn't belong to just the English, just the people of London, just the people of America or Australia, but it belongs to everyone. We are not at the boundary, at the periphery. we are at the center. All of us are at the center. So that means plural, like not singular, and centricity, like everyone is at the center. The abandonment of the native speaker ideal, as we've discussed. Rejection of the target language context as acquisitional prototype. So here this means, and this will be expanded on later on, but I'm just giving you a heads up. It means that, and it will be rejecting the, or rejection of the, so there's a typo here. So rejection of the target language context as acquisitional prototype. This means that if a scholar studies how language acquisition is done in Bangladesh, then he or she cannot say that it is representative of how people learn a second language in another country, like in India, even though the contexts may be similar or is quite similar. Or of course they are not the same as as how a child acquires a second language in Africa, because the contexts are different, especially if the differences are between the first world country and a third world country, or it may not just be specific overall the country's social or economic conditions. It can be very situation specific, like if the child is raised by an only mom, or is raised by his or her uncles. So those things are very much matter, and we cannot generalize them. So here specifically it says that rejection of the target language context. So if we think that if researchers have studied about American children's second language acquisition, then they cannot set it as the prototype. They cannot set it as the model for how children of other countries will learn a second language in the very same way. We cannot say that English children, children whose mother tongue is English, they can say 2 or more words by the time they are 2 years old. That doesn't mean that children everywhere should also know 2 years or more than 2 words. For example, in Bangla, we don't actually have to say as many words in Bangla as in English. For example, khabo. If I say khabo, like I don't need to say ami khabo. It is enough to say khabo, because even as adults we don't say ami khabo. We don't always say that. Whereas in English, if you just say eat, then it's not self-explanatory. What does eat mean? Does it mean that you want to eat, or it's already something also already been eaten? So you should say I eat or I want to eat, right? So there are important differences between languages. So we should not think of the target language context when it's the English. We should not think of the English children as being the prototype or the ideal for other language speakers as well. And then rejection of formalist ontology. So that means focusing more on meaning rather than structure. And rejection of the centrality of multilingualism in SLA theorizing. So here it means that we should not it's similar to this one, rejection of the target language context as acquisitional prototype, whereas it focused on acquisition of how children learn, or even how adults learn a second language. It's this D number point refers to more about thinking about about bilinguals or multilinguals as the ideal, or as the at least, if not the ideal, as the norm, because there are more there are more speakers of English as their second or third language than there are people who speak English as their first language. So we should not just think about monolingualism or monolingual English speakers and base all the theories from them. Rather, we should also think about, or maybe we should think more about people who speak English as a second or as a foreign language. E number is recognition of the dynamic bidirectional interaction of languages in the learner and user. So here again we come upon the term dynamic, which is not that it's static. It is not a one directional, unidirectional. It's not unidirectional that their first language. For example, someone's first language is Bangla. My first language is Bangla, and if I want to learn English, when I had to learn English when I was in the developmental stages, so it doesn't mean that my Bangla only affects my English. It can also be that my English affects my Bangla, and the effect may not be actually bad. Like if people have a Bangla accent when they speak English, so it's not necessarily bad, and both of their languages affect one another. So I think that you get it, that because we know Bangla and English both, some of our Bangla terms, like we say jinish, we say we add an English prefix or an English suffix. For example, shamoshas, like shamosha is shamosha means problem. We add s to make it plural. So this is just one example. There are more subtle and more interesting examples which I can't think of right now. So F is giving up integrative motivation as essential to success in SLA. So there are two main types of motivation. So motivation to learn a second language, that's what motivation here refers to, not just any type of motivation, not just like someone is very motivated by nature. So it may be like that, but it's specifically for language acquisition, language learning. So integrative means if someone wants to be integrated into the second language, into the language community. For example, if you want to learn English in order to live in an English speaking country in the future, for example in America, in London, in Australia, then you have integrative motivation. But if you have an instrumental motivation, an instrumental source of motivation, this means that you are using your future learning of English, or the fact that you are learning English, the motivation you are using is that you will use it for a specific or a wide range of purposes. Like you're using the learning of the language as a means, as a tool for your further development. For example, if you want to learn English for a job, if you want to learn English to do anything related to learning English, then it's instrumental motivation. So here it refers to the paradigm shift or the convergence of SLA and world Englishes converges, because SLA researchers used to think that integrative motivation is more important and more successful, is more powerful than instrumental motivation. But now they are starting to realize that most people have instrumental motivation, that they don't actually want to learn English in order to stay in an English speaking country or be natural in an English speaking country. They learn English for their own goals, whatever their goals may be. So that is instrument. Instrument, the word comes from instrument of like a tool. We learn English as a tool. We briefly comment on some of these developments below. So I already talked about these developments, but I'll still read through and I'll not focus on every single line. So the first thing is the pluricentricity. Let me read. One of the most important impacts of world Englishes has been the widespread acknowledgement of the fact that English is a pluricentric language. Alright, and another thing is that I didn't take many notes up to now because I wanted to take notes from these sections. So I'll take some brief 1 to 2 line notes from each of the 2.1, 2.2, each of the subsections here. Okay, so this is one of the most important impacts of world Englishes on SLA, that people are now realizing that English doesn't actually belong to just 1 or 2 nations, it's for everyone. The point was perhaps first made in 1938 by the great Indian English novelist and intellectual Raja Rao. So he was the first one who made an argument for the pluricentricity of English. You might want to highlight this, or you may not. I am highlighting this because I want to remember, or I want to see the year and the name of the person who actually made the first argument of this. So he said, we cannot write like the English, and we should not. We cannot write only as Indians. So they cannot write like the English, and they should not write like the English, and they also cannot write like the Indians, because the other Indians, the majority of Indians, they may not know English, at least in 1938. So those Indians who learned English, they have a separate hybrid identity, right? Our method of expression has to be a dialect. So whenever you come across a word, this word dialect, so here normally dialect means about how one speaks, right? If one has a dialect, one has a regional accent, we say the word dialect, right? Like Chittagonian dialect, Sylheti dialect, right? But here dialect doesn't refer to accent or pronunciation. Here dialect refers to a dialectical relationship, like there has to be a give and take, there has to be an interaction between our first language and our second language. Like there should be a hybrid between our like for Indians, for between their Hindi and English. Has to be a dialect which will someday prove to be as distinctive and colorful as the Irish and the American. So he spoke about the Irish and the American as in a very positive terms, and say that their identity, that they speak very, and they use their language very differently, very uniquely. That's a good thing. So they also sorry. So Raja Rao also wanted Indian English to be unique, and now about 80 years later, 83 years later, yes, we do have an Indian English which is very much distinct and unique, right? Whenever we hear an Indian speaking in English, we can distinguish that he or she is an Indian, and that's not a bad thing. That's probably a good thing. This sentiment was echoed by so whenever we come across the term some sentiment or this sentiment, that sentiment was echoed. So sentiments being echoed means that whatever someone said, if another person echoes his or her sentiments, it means that he or she agrees, and he or she agrees and also says the same thing. So let's see who said the same thing. By the Nobel Prize winning Nigerian novelist Chinua Achebe. So Chinua Achebe is very famous African writer who declared, "I feel that the English language will be able to carry the weight of my African experience." So he is saying that English is good, English is a good thing, and it can carry my African experience. But it will have to be a new English, it will have to be a hybrid, still in full communion with its ancestral home. Like it should have some links and some roots of Africa, of African culture, tradition. It cannot just follow A to Z of 100% follow the rules and the norms of the British, the Americans, but it should be distinctly African, but it can still be English. It cannot. It doesn't mean that Chinua Achebe didn't say that English should be abandoned in favor of some African language. He said that English is good, but it should have our own flavor. It should have an African flavor, but altered to suit new African surroundings. Ortega in this issue credits World Englishes as the first paradigm to recognize the diffusion of English globally. So the first paradigm, when we say this, as we already mentioned, that paradigm refers to shared ideologies, a shared set of beliefs. So the first shared set of beliefs that World Englishes was able to contribute to the field, to linguistics as a whole, was this idea that English is not just a singular, and it shouldn't have the British and the Americans as the norm, but it is very much different in whatever area it is used in. It is used globally, and no one is the owner of English. Wherever it is used, English is used, they are the owner, and they can alter it. Just because African Americans or African people, Bangladeshi people, Indian people, we change the way we speak or write the language, doesn't mean that it's wrong, it's something wrong. So I'll pause here a bit because the azan is going.